Welcome to Scenario, the deep dive podcast for analysis and reviews. Today, we're jumping into something really central to, well, all of our lives, long-term relationships. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to have these truly fantastic relationships? Is it just luck? Destiny?
Well, according to relationship experts, the answer is actually more practical. It comes down to habits.
Right, habits. And not necessarily ones you're born with, but ones anyone can learn and develop.
Exactly. Looking at years of work with countless couples, we've identified 4 key habits that really pop up again and again in successful relationships. This isn't just theory. It's based on direct observation of what works and, just as importantly, what's often missing when relationships are struggling.
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into these 4 habits. Think of this as maybe a toolkit for your own relationship life, whether you've been together for years or just starting out, or maybe you're just curious about how people connect. Our goal is to give you some really concrete keys, for building stronger, more fulfilling connections. Let's kick off with the first habit. Be curious, not critical. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it?
It does, but the implications are pretty profound. This habit really helps us navigate that frustration when our expectations aren't met.
Yeah, I remember the experts talking about their own early experiences, working together and being in a relationship. Apparently, their different work styles created quite a bit of tension. They even argued about how their desks were arranged.
Ah, yes, that story. It sounds minor, but it highlights a key point. Often our biggest frustrations just stem from, well, unrecognized or misunderstood strengths in the other person. Being curious means actually investing the time to understand how the other person is wired, you could say.
Wired, like their motivations, how they approach things.
Exactly. Their motivations, their ways of tackling problems. So instead of criticizing a difference, you try to understand the why behind it. And often you find that difference can actually be a complementary strength. It's just different from your own approach.
So less judgment, more, why do they do that?
Precisely. It's about shifting from judgment to genuine inquiry, understanding their perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving on to the second habit, be careful, not crushing. This one tackles conflict, which, let's face it, is pretty unavoidable in any relationship.
Absolutely unavoidable. And our default fight-or-flight reactions, while useful maybe evolutionarily, are often pretty self-centered in a relationship conflict.
How so?
Well, they're focused on protecting ourselves or, winning the argument rather than finding a resolution together. We really need to sort of reprogram those initial responses, develop skills that let us handle conflict while still caring for each other.
Skills like?
Like working towards real solutions together. It's about learning to pause that automatic defensive reaction.
Right. The experts we talked to really emphasize setting some ground rules for disagreements, basic stuff.
Crucial stuff, like agreeing not to use insults or storming off angrily or making threats, things that just escalate things destructively.
So you avoid falling into the same damaging patterns every time you argue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Arguing is normal, it happens, but how you argue, doing it constructively, that's what makes all the difference. It can actually strengthen the relationship if handled well.
Interesting. Okay, habit number 3. Ask, don't assume. This sounds like a big one for tackling mistrust or resentment.
A huge one. So many problems bubble up from just assuming things.
Yeah.
Making assumptions about what the other person thinks or feels or means.
Yeah, the experts shared that story about Rachel and Steve, a couple really struggling because they had totally different ideas about what respect looked like in the relationship.
That's right. Steve had these quite traditional expectations based on how his parents interacted about Rachel's role.
And Rachel had a completely different view, right? She felt kind of put down, not valued.
Exactly. And this whole conflict was simmering because neither of them had actually talked about their underlying assumptions. That story really shows how assumptions and, frankly, stereotypes can seriously undermine a relationship.
So the habit, ask, means what exactly?
It means having those sometimes difficult, courageous conversations to really understand the other person's perspective. Openly discussing expectations, needs, values, not taking anything for granted.
Just asking the question.
Just asking. For Rachel and Steve, simply having that conversation, putting their different views on the table, it unlocked a stalemate that had been going on for years. It was causing immense pain.
Wow. It sounds so simple, but clearly hard to do in the moment.
It takes practice and vulnerability, but it builds genuine trust and respect.
Okay, which brings us to the 4th and final habit for today. Connect before precy. Correct.
We're doing the
This is
same.
about valuing the other person, right? Not just focusing on flaws.
Precisely. It's about communicating appreciation and value and pushing back against that tendency we sometimes have to only focus on what's wrong or what needs fixing.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap in daily life, isn't it? Taking your partner for granted.
So easy. We get caught up in logistics, tasks, problems, and forget to nurture the connection itself. But fundamentally, people stay in relationships where they feel seen, appreciated, and valued for who they are.
So actively building warmth.
Actively finding meaningful, specific ways to build warmth and positive feeling. Breaking the routine sometimes, creating moments of real connection. It doesn't have to be grand gestures.
Like what, for example?
Simple things. A genuine compliment. Really listening without interrupting, a hug, sharing something positive about your day. It's about prioritizing that emotional connection.
The experts stressed how doing this keeps that spark, that magic alive. So the relationship doesn't just become about managing tasks.
Exactly. And they added, with a bit of a smile, that a strong emotional connection often benefits the physical intimacy side of things, too.
Makes sense. Connection fuels connection.
And, these 4 habits, they aren't just nice-to-haves. They can have a truly profound impact, sometimes literally life-saving.
You're referring to the story about Rachel.
Yes. The fact that during her emotional distress, she'd had some very dark thoughts. It just underscores how deeply a relationship crisis can affect mental health.
That's sobering. And the broader data backs this up, doesn't it? High divorce rates, the negative impact on mental health for adults and kids.
The costs are huge, socially and personally.
We invest so much in other areas of life, education, careers, finances, our homes.
But how much intentional effort do we put into actively investing in our relationships? It often gets overlooked until there's a crisis.
A really important question.
So the hope here is that by developing and practicing these 4 relatively simple habits, being more curious than critical.
You're more careful than crushing.
More likely to ask than assume.
And connecting before correcting.
Right. By doing these things, we don't just significantly boost the chances of our relationships succeeding and being fulfilling. We actually start to thrive more as individuals, as families, and even as communities. Healthier relationships ripple outwards.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners. Take a moment to reflect on these 4 habits. Which one feels like the biggest challenge for you personally right now? And maybe which one, if you started practicing it, could bring the most significant positive change to your connections?
Yeah, good questions to ponder.
This deep dive is really just a starting point. We hope it inspires you to actively cultivate your relationships. Thanks for listening to Scenario.